"You're too old to live alone. Sell the farm, I need the money." My son told me 2 weeks before Christmas. I said nothing. I started packing up my keepsakes quietly. But what they didn't realize was that I was also preparing to reclaim my life. My name is Agnes. I'm 70 years old, a widow, and for the past decade, I've lived alone on the wheat farm Richard and I built with our own hands in Kansas. After he passed, people assumed I'd sell everything and move to the city, but I stayed. The creak of the porch, the golden stretch of wheat fields, the familiar whistle of the old kettle, this was my peace. Then, just 14 days before Christmas, my son Scott showed up. He hadn't visited in a year, no calls, no holidays. So when I saw him walking up the path, my heart leapt. Maybe he missed me. Maybe he brought my sweet granddaughter, Chloe. But Scott didn't come for memories. He came for my land. "Mom," he started, avoiding my eyes. "You're too old to live out here alone. It's not safe anymore." Then came Brenda, his wife. She didn't hug me. She didn't even step inside. She walked around the property, taking photos with her phone, like she was appraising it. Scott sat me down. He said they wanted me to move in with them in the city, that they had a nice room ready, that I could help out with Chloe, keep busy. And then he said the words that made my stomach twist. "We also need a little help, just to co-sign a loan. If you could put up the farm as collateral, just temporarily, it's only paperwork, nothing will change." I stared at him, stunned. My farm, my home, the place Richard and I had built over 40 years. He wanted to mortgage it, like it was his. But I didn't scream. I didn't throw him out. I simply nodded slowly, maybe out of shock, maybe out of fear, or maybe because part of me still wanted to believe he cared. The next few days passed in a blur. I packed a few small boxes, our wedding photo, my grandmother's hand-stitched quilt, a worn Bible with Richard's handwriting in the margins. I didn't tell anyone how heavy each item felt in my hands. When Scott came to pick me up, I turned back one last time. The sunlight danced on the wheat like it always did. The wind whispered through the trees. And then I left it all behind. Their house was sleek, modern, and cold. Brenda led me down to the basement. "This is your room," she said. It had no windows. The air smelled of damp concrete and rubber. There was a thin mattress on a metal frame and a folding chair. Brenda handed me a typed schedule of chores. "We all do our part," she said flatly. That night, I sat on the bed and stared at the blank wall. Scott didn't come down. No one asked if I was settling in. No one offered me tea. In that cold, silent space, I held the photo of Richard and whispered, "I miss you." And for the first time in a long time, I felt something break inside me. Not just sorrow, not just confusion, but something deeper, something I couldn't name yet. I had given everything I had, and somehow I had become nothing more than a shadow in my own family. The next morning, I woke up to the muffled thumping of footsteps above me. The basement was darker than I remembered. My knees ached from the cold that seemed to seep up through the floorboards. There was no clock, no window, only time measured by chores. I walked upstairs quietly. Brenda was already in the kitchen. "You missed the trash pickup. It goes out on Tuesdays. I guess you'll remember next time," she said, not even looking up from her phone. I mumbled, "Sorry," and poured myself a cup of coffee, only to realize it was the last of the pot. Brenda stared at me like I had stolen something. "Next time ask," she said sharply. "That's Scott's blend." That night, I added a line to my notebook. "I am no longer a person, just a set of hands, a vacuum with legs." I never planned to write anything down, but the silence inside me kept growing, pressing against my chest like a weight. I needed somewhere to put the words I couldn't say aloud. So each night, in my little basement corner, I wrote. About the chores, about the cold, about how Brenda barked orders and Scott barely looked me in the eye. About how Chloe, my own granddaughter, hadn't even seen me since I moved. They kept her busy, they said. Dance classes, private tutoring. Brenda didn't want her distracted. The house was large, but I was always in the smallest room. I tried to tell Scott once when we passed in the hallway. The basement's a little cold at night. He cut me off. I'll get to it, Mom. Just try to wear thicker socks. That was it. That was all he said. The next day, I spilled some laundry detergent while trying to carry the bottles upstairs. My hand slipped on the plastic. A splash of blue hit the floor. Brenda screamed like I'd dropped acid on the carpet. Do you know how much that costs? You're not careful. You make more work for me. I tried to apologize, bending down with a cloth, but she snatched it from my hands. Go back to your room. I'll clean it. Go back to your room. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. That was a command. And something about the way she said it stung deeper than I expected. Later that week, my right knee throbbed so badly I could barely stand. I mentioned it to Brenda, hoping, just hoping, someone might take notice. That's normal at your age, she said, brushing past me. Nothing to fuss over. I don't have time to take you to a doctor. Another note in the notebook. Aches are not allowed. Costs must be minimized. I must one evening, during dinner, Scott made an offhand comment about how expensive pizza delivery was becoming. Then he looked at me. Maybe we should start cooking more at home. 3 mouths are a lot, huh? Brenda chuckled, but didn't look up. I understood what he meant. I was no longer a guest. I was a liability. Later that night, I sat on the cold floor of the basement, wrapped in an old quilt I brought from the farm. The air felt thinner here. My chest was tight. My eyes stayed dry, but inside, something was beginning to crack. A birthday card came in the mail the next morning, from Chloe. It was pink and glittery and had a hand-drawn heart. Inside it said, "Happy birthday, Grandma. I love you. I miss the wheat fields." That was the first time in weeks I cried, because in that tiny card, I felt seen, and for just a moment, I remembered who I used to be. There were days I barely left the basement. Some mornings I stayed, curled under the quilt, pretending to sleep long after the sun had risen. I waited until the creaks of the upstairs floorboards faded before creeping into the kitchen to make tea. I moved like a stranger in someone else's house, because I was. One afternoon, I found myself kneeling on the floor, scrubbing the grout between bathroom tiles. Brenda had left a post-it note on the mirror with 3 words, "Deep clean, urgent." As I scrubbed, I caught my reflection in the chrome faucet. My hair, once thick and silver, looked dull and brittle. My skin, dry and colorless. I didn't recognize the woman crouched on the tile floor. Who was she? A grandmother? A maid? A burden? I used to feel proud of my strength. I once drove a tractor across icy fields before dawn. I birthed calves in thunderstorms, sewed Chloe's first dress by hand, and kept our farm alive through drought and debt. But now I couldn't even request a doctor's appointment without being told I was fussing. The silence I carried grew louder. In the evenings, I would sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, holding the notebook in my lap. Writing helped, but some pain has no words. I missed my husband. I missed the kitchen that smelled like cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. I missed the laughter around the dinner table, the wind through the wheat fields, and the quiet kind of freedom only home can offer. But more than anything, I missed the sound of someone asking me what I needed. One night, after everyone was asleep, I climbed the stairs quietly, barefoot. I stood at the entrance of the living room. From where I stood, I could see framed photos on the mantel. Scott and Brenda at their wedding, Chloe in her recital dress, a family smiling without me. I realized something awful in that moment. They didn't miss me. Not really, not the me that mattered. They only missed what I could do. Later that week, it rained heavily. The basement flooded near the door, soaking my shoes and the edge of my quilt. When I told Scott, he said, "Yeah, I've been meaning to fix that. Just keep things off the floor." That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't living here. I was stored here. Stored in a space they didn't care to maintain. A silent, shrinking presence in a house too clean to hold memory. One evening, as I finished folding laundry, I heard the doorbell ring. I didn't answer it, of course. That wasn't my place. But I peeked through the hallway and saw an older woman with short white hair standing at the front door. Brenda opened it. "Doris," she said, surprised. "I'm here to see Agnes," the woman replied. I felt my heart flutter. Doris was my neighbor back in Kansas. We used to talk over the fence, share tomatoes in summer. She had moved to the city 2 years ago. I had no idea she still remembered me. Brenda hesitated, then stepped aside. We sat in the basement, yes, in that same cold room, and talked for over an hour about farming, about husbands we'd outlived, about the loneliness no one talks about. I didn't have to explain myself to her. She just understood. When she left, I walked her to the door. "You don't belong in a basement," she whispered. "You're not furniture. You're still Agnes." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and replayed her words. I'm still Agnes, not a ghost, not a shadow, not a burden. And I realized I couldn't stay here much longer. The day I fell, no one noticed. It happened in the bathroom. I had bent over to scrub a mildew stain Brenda pointed out. Somehow, even a speck on the corner tile felt like my personal failure. The floors were always damp in the basement-level bathroom, and I'd worn them before. But that morning, my knee gave out. I slipped sideways and landed hard on my hip. I lay there, breath knocked out of me, heart pounding against the cold tile. I didn't cry out, because who would come? When I finally sat up, dizzy and sore, I heard Brenda upstairs yelling on the phone. Scott wasn't even home. By the time I limped up the stairs, gripping the railing like a lifeline, Brenda looked at me and frowned. "What happened to you?" "I slipped in the bathroom. The floor was wet." She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't offer to help. She pointed toward the mop closet and said flatly, "Then mop it up. We can't afford someone getting hurt in this house." I stared at her, stunned. Somewhere, deep in my chest, something cracked. Not like a sudden explosion, but like a quiet splintering. My body ached, but the ache inside me was worse. I returned to the basement, dragging my right foot slightly behind me. That night, I didn't write in my notebook. I couldn't even hold the pen. I sat in silence, and I started to remember. Richard, my husband, once told me, "After a bad harvest, you can lose everything and still be you, Aggie. But if you lose your dignity, you lose the fight." I had forgotten that. I had forgotten me. The next morning, I stood in front of the cracked mirror, touching the bruise on my hip, and whispered, "I want out." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just clear. Later that day, I bundled up in 2 sweaters and went outside to get some air. That's when I saw Doris again, walking her dog just down the street. "Hey, stranger," she called out. We stood in the cold, chatting like we used to by the Kansas fence. I didn't say much, but she noticed my limp. "What happened?" she asked. I tried to shrug it off. "Just a fall, I'm fine." She didn't believe me. "You're not fine," she said. "You're shrinking." I blinked. "Shrinking?" "You used to stand tall," Doris said. "Now you fold into yourself, like you're trying to disappear." I didn't respond. "Come over tomorrow," she added. "Just for lunch. Bring your notebook." I was startled. "How do you know about the notebook?" She smiled. "Because I have one too." That night, I hesitated. Brenda didn't like surprises, especially if it involved guests or using the house like it's yours. But I didn't care. For once, I wanted to feel normal. So the next day, I invited Doris over. We sat in the kitchen, had tuna sandwiches, and laughed about nothing. I poured us tea. She helped me slice apples. It was the first time I had real conversation in months. And then it happened. Brenda walked in. She stopped cold when she saw Doris sitting at the table. "What is this?" she barked. "You're having company, using our food, without asking?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "You don't get to act like this is your house," she snapped. "You're here for free. You don't invite people into our home." Doris stood up slowly, her voice calm. "This is how you talk to your husband's mother?" Brenda scoffed. "This is how I talk to someone who forgets where she stands." I felt something snap. Right there in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by half-sliced apples and a cup of untouched tea, I felt a fire rise in me I hadn't felt since Richard died. I looked Brenda in the eyes, not with anger, but with clarity. "I didn't forget," I said quietly. "But maybe you did." Doris touched my arm. I looked at her, then at the ceiling, then at the empty hallway behind Brenda. And I knew it was almost time. Time to leave, time to reclaim what remained of me. The next morning, Brenda knocked on the basement door, not softly, not kindly, but like a landlord pounding on a tenant's door who's overdue. "We're cleaning out this room," she said bluntly. "You'll need to move into the storage space near the garage. It's cleaner, has less moisture." I blinked at her. She meant the concrete utility room, the one that smelled like paint thinner, the one with no heat. "I'll be sick in there," I whispered. "You're not a child," she replied. "Put on an extra blanket." She turned and left before I could say anything else. I sat there on the edge of the mattress, staring at the faded walls around me. I had been shoved downward once before, from my own home to their basement. But this was a burial, a quiet attempt to erase me completely. Scott didn't even call to check in. That night, I moved into the new room. I dragged my few belongings, my Bible, my notebook, the quilt, and the photo of Richard, into the cold box of a space. There was a weak bulb hanging from a wire and a thin cot pressed against the wall. It felt like a holding cell. That night, I coughed through my sleep, waking shivering and dizzy. My joints throbbed, and my skin felt paper-thin. I tried calling out, but no one came. No one even noticed. I realized I could die in this room, and no one would know until breakfast. The next day, Brenda passed by me in the hallway, without so much as a glance. She only paused long enough to mutter, "Don't go near Chloe's room." That sentence broke something final inside me. Not because I wanted to see Chloe, but because Brenda had the gall to say it, as if I was some kind of threat. A contamination, not a grandmother, not a mother, not even a woman. Just an object that needed to stay out of the way. I didn't pack that night. I didn't run or scream. Instead, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror upstairs, the one Brenda always kept spotless, and looked at my reflection. For the first time in months, I saw myself clearly. A woman who'd raised a son. A woman who kept a farm alive during storms. A woman who buried her husband and still stood tall. A woman who never took more than she gave. I traced the edge of the bruise on my hip and said out loud, "This is enough." No one heard me, but it didn't matter. That night, I knocked softly on Chloe's door. She opened it just a little, eyes wide and cautious. "Grandma," she whispered. "I'm leaving," I said gently. "I just wanted you to know it's not your fault." She nodded, lips trembling. "I miss the wheat fields," she said. "I miss you." "I miss you too, sweetheart." I didn't cry. I didn't have time. I slipped a note into the mailbox addressed to Doris. 3 words. "I'm coming tomorrow." Then I went back to the storage room, placed my notebook and photo carefully in a cloth bag, and lay down one last time on that cold cot. I woke up before dawn. The house was quiet. I walked out with nothing but my coat, the bag, and a spine made of steel I forgot I had. When Doris opened the door, she didn't say a word. She just stepped aside and let me in. Her small apartment smelled like cinnamon and laundry soap. There were books on the coffee table, a plant on the windowsill, and 2 blankets folded on the couch. She handed me a cup of tea. "You're not a guest here," she said. "You're home." And that's when it happened. I broke. Tears rolled down my cheeks, not loud, not messy, just steady. I didn't speak. I didn't explain. I simply wept for the version of myself I had lost and the sliver of her that still remained. Doris sat beside me. She didn't hug me. She didn't offer clichés. She just sat in silence, letting me fall apart in peace. That night I slept in a real bed, with sheets that smelled like lavender and pillows that didn't cave in like regret. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. And when I woke up, I was Agnes again. The morning after I moved in with Doris, I woke to the smell of pancakes, real pancakes, with butter and maple syrup. She'd already set the table for 2, and even brewed a cup of black coffee, strong the way I liked it. We didn't talk much over breakfast. We didn't need to. There was something about being in a space where you're not constantly evaluated that made every moment feel still, peaceful. Later that afternoon, we went for a walk. Just 2 old women in coats too big for our frames, talking about tomato seeds and old friends we'd outlived. As we walked past a nearby park bench, the wind lifted a few pages out of my cloth bag. My notebook spilled open and fluttered into the breeze. Oh no, I bent down, but someone else had already picked it up. A young man, maybe in his mid-20s, slim with glasses and a legal pad tucked under one arm. He handed it to me with a polite smile. "I didn't read much," he said, "but are you writing your story?" I froze. "Yes," I replied softly. "Sort of." He introduced himself as Kevin, a law student doing part-time work at the city's senior legal aid office. When he noticed the bruises on my wrist and the slow way I moved, he grew quiet. "Do you mind if I ask, were you living with family before?" I hesitated. Then I looked him in the eye and said the truth. My son and his wife, they made me sign over the farm as collateral for their loan, said it was just paperwork. Then they kept me in a basement, eventually a storage room. He didn't flinch. He pulled out a small notebook from his coat pocket and started scribbling notes. "That's elder abuse," he said bluntly. "Financial and emotional, possibly even physical neglect. It's illegal." I blinked. I had never heard someone say it like that. Illegal, not sad, not unfortunate, but criminal. Kevin asked if I'd be willing to come with him to the Senior Legal Aid Center. He'd connect me with one of the pro bono lawyers specializing in elder rights. I looked at Doris. She nodded. And so we went. That afternoon, I met Nancy Carter, a woman in her 50s with a firm handshake and kind eyes. She listened without interrupting while I told the story I'd only ever written in my notebook. I handed her the journal, hands trembling. She read a few pages in silence. Then she looked up and said, "We can fight this." "But I signed the papers," I whispered. "Yes," she replied, "but we can prove coercion, especially if the property was used without your full understanding or benefit, and we'll file for full restitution." It felt unreal. I was no longer someone to be dismissed or ignored. I was a plaintiff, a woman with rights. Nancy gave me documents to sign. This time I read every word. At the bottom of the final page was a line that made my throat tighten. Client, Agnes May Walker. I hadn't seen my full name in print in years. When I returned home to Doris's that evening, she handed me a pair of knitting needles and a fresh ball of yarn. "For your nerves," she said. I smiled. I didn't knit, but I started anyway. Loop by loop, I pulled myself back together. That weekend, Scott called me. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. "What are you doing?" "You're being dramatic." "You're going to destroy our family." Then came Brenda's voicemail. Bitter, furious. "You ungrateful old woman. After everything we've done for you, you'll regret this. We'll make sure of it." I saved the message. Nancy said it would help in court. That night, as I sipped tea in Doris's apartment, wrapped in a blanket and surrounded by quiet, I realized something profound. They were no longer yelling because they were in control. They were yelling because they'd lost it. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not the air, but the feeling. Like everyone inside carried 1,000 silent stories, waiting to be heard or forgotten. I sat beside Nancy Carter, my attorney. Kevin was behind us, quietly flipping through a folder of documents he'd helped prepare. Doris squeezed my hand from the other bench, her eyes steady and sure. Scott walked in, flanked by a sharp-suited lawyer. He didn't even look at me. Brenda sat beside him, arms folded tight, lips curled like she was tasting something sour. When the judge called my name, Agnes May Walker, I stood. For a brief second, I was terrified. My knees trembled, my chest clenched. But then I saw the photo in my mind. Richard, standing by the wheat fields, saying, "You lose your dignity, you lose the fight." So I didn't lose it. I walked to the front of the room, placed my hand on the worn Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Nancy presented everything. The loan documents Scott had rushed me to sign, the recordings of their messages, the notebook entries I had written, and even photos of the basement and storage room. Scott's lawyer tried to argue that I was graciously taken in by a loving family, and that any misunderstanding was just generational miscommunication. But the judge's eyes narrowed when Nancy played Brenda's voicemail aloud. "You ungrateful old woman, after everything we've done for you, you'll regret this. We'll make sure of it." The courtroom went quiet. I looked down at my hands, wrinkled, veined, but steady. Then came the moment Nancy had warned me about. The judge asked, "Mrs. Walker, would you like to say anything?" I stood slowly, took a breath, then looked directly at Scott. "My son says I'm too old to live alone, that I can't think clearly or make my own decisions. But I remember every word he said the day he asked me to sign over my home. I remember that he didn't hug me, that Brenda didn't even greet me, that they saw my land before they saw me." Brenda rolled her eyes. I kept going. They didn't want me. They wanted what I owned. And when I became inconvenient, they put me in a basement, then a storage room. No window, no heat, no dignity. My voice didn't shake. "I'm not asking for revenge," I said clearly. "I'm asking for my life back, my rights, and the recognition that I'm still a person, still a mother, still Agnes." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was respectful. The judge leaned back, steepling her fingers. Then came the ruling. The mortgage agreement was declared void, assigned under pressure, lacking informed consent. The property was restored under my sole ownership. Scott was ordered to pay restitution for financial abuse. Brenda received probation and a formal restraining order. Neither one of them looked at me as the bailiff escorted them out. But I didn't need them to, because I had finally looked at myself and seen someone worth defending. Back at Doris's apartment that night, I didn't cry. I didn't jump for joy either. Instead, I exhaled the heaviest breath I'd held for years. "I thought I'd feel triumphant," I admitted. Doris nodded. "You feel free. It's quieter than people expect." She was right. Freedom wasn't loud. It was the warmth of a hand-knitted scarf. The hush of tea poured into your favorite mug. The knowledge that you don't need anyone's permission to exist. That night, we sat on the couch watching the sun dip behind the city buildings. Kevin dropped by with a small envelope. Inside was a certificate from the court affirming my restored ownership of the farm. But the real prize was something else. I picked up my notebook, now worn at the corners, and flipped to the final page. I wrote, "I left as a ghost, I returned as Agnes, and I'll never disappear again." Spring had just begun to whisper across the Kansas plains when I stepped out of the car. The wind smelled like home. Golden wheat still hadn't been planted, but the land was waiting, quiet, vast, forgiving. The farmhouse stood just as I'd left it, only dustier, the porch swing creaking softly in the breeze like it remembered me. I stood there for a long time, breathing it all in. No one told me what to do. No one watched me from a window, waiting to correct my steps. I belonged again, not to anyone else, but to myself. Doris moved in a week later. She brought only 2 suitcases, her teapot, and a faded quilt with sunflowers stitched across the edges. "I've always wanted to see what real stars look like at night," she said. "City lights ruin them." We fell into a gentle rhythm. 2 women, not roommates, but witnesses to each other's quiet survival. We shared meals on the porch, sat in silence during sunrises, and watched storms roll across the open sky like ocean tides. One evening, as the horizon glowed orange, we heard the knock. I opened the door. It was Mrs. Murphy, our old neighbor, now in her 80s, holding a pie and blinking through thick glasses. "I heard you were back," she said, her voice cracked but warm. "Wasn't sure if you'd want company." Doris pulled out 2 more chairs without a word. We sat there, the 3 of us, sipping tea, eating pie that tasted like memory, and letting the quiet speak for us. It wasn't a party, it was a return, and that meant more. Later that night, I sat on the porch alone with my notebook. No longer hidden, no longer written out of fear. Just words, honest ones. I turned to a blank page and wrote slowly. "Healing doesn't feel like fire. It feels like sunlight on skin after a long winter. Strength isn't loud. It's knowing when to walk away and when to return. And motherhood should never mean disappearing." I closed the book and looked up at the stars Doris had come for. They were sharp and endless and quietly alive. Sometimes Chloe writes, little letters, carefully printed, with glittery stickers on the envelopes. She tells me about her classes, her cat, the latest dance she's learning. I don't know if Brenda approves, but Chloe writes anyway. And I always write back. I don't ask about her parents, I ask about her. Because I've learned something precious. You don't need to chase what broke you just to prove you're still whole. People in town started dropping by over time. A former student from church, a retired postman, even the mayor's wife, who asked if I'd speak at the community center about elder dignity and independence. I said yes, not because I wanted attention, but because there might be another woman out there, someone sitting in silence, thinking she's out of options. Maybe if she hears my story, she won't wait as long as I did. Maybe she'll leave the first time someone tries to put her in a storage room. Maybe she'll realize, like I did, that she never needed permission to protect herself. The farm doesn't look the same, but I'm planting again. Not just wheat. Hope, peace, self-respect. And this time I'm growing it for me. The sun was setting over the Kansas fields like a gentle blessing, lavender and gold washing over the wheat that had not yet been sown. I stood on the porch, wrapped in Doris's sunflower-patterned shawl, both hands around a warm cup of cinnamon tea. This place, this soil, this air, held more than just memories now. It held me, whole, unowned, untouched by anyone's expectations. Inside the house, a soft silence wrapped itself around every room like a second skin. No one demanded chores. No one shouted down hallways. The only footsteps now were mine, and Doris's, soft, unhurried, living with intention, not obligation. A week ago, the final court papers arrived, a cream-colored envelope, heavy with consequence, stamped with the seal of the state. Inside was the judge's ruling, Agnes May Walker, sole legal owner of 112 acres of land, Kansas. I held the document against my chest and whispered the words aloud to the wind, not for anyone else to hear, just for me. It wasn't just the title to a piece of land, it was proof that I mattered, that what happened to me was real, that my life still belonged to me. In the early hours of morning, I sometimes reread parts of my notebook, the old one now frayed and water-stained from the days I spent writing in a damp basement. Those pages aren't pretty, but they are honest, and I don't hide them anymore. They tell the truth of what happens when love becomes twisted with control, when a mother becomes a servant, when dignity is taken in teaspoons until you forget what full feels like. But they also show something else, that even the smallest voice, when spoken with truth, can echo in courtrooms and hearts. Last Thursday, I stood in front of 40 women at the senior center in town. They wore reading glasses, hearing aids, wedding rings long since loosened with age. But their eyes, God, their eyes were sharp, curious, heavy with stories. I told them mine, not just the legal battle, but the quiet war before it, the slow daily erosion of respect. The way my own son's voice became colder than any Kansas winter, how silence became my prison. And I said to them, you don't have to be loud to be heard, you don't have to fight to matter, but you do have to stop shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort. There were tears, not of pity, but of recognition. After the talk, one woman hugged me and whispered, "You said everything I never knew I needed to hear." That night, I walked the field behind the house with Doris. The stars came out slowly, one by one, as if the sky were remembering itself. Doris looked up and asked, "Do you think you'll ever sell this place?" I shook my head. Number I might plant less, rest more. But this land, it remembers me, and I remember it. She smiled. That's all anyone really wants, isn't it? To be remembered, to matter. I nodded. To be free. Later that evening, I opened a new notebook. The old one was complete, its final page already signed in courage. This new one had crisp pages, waiting to be filled not with grief, but with becoming. I titled it, The Backbone Journal, Volume 2. Then I wrote, "To the woman I used to be, thank you. You kept going when no one saw you. You folded and bent and gave until it almost broke you. But now I see you clearly. You were never weak, just waiting to be remembered by yourself. I am Agnes, I have returned, and no one, not blood, not law, not shame, gets to erase me again.